All right, everyone. Yeah, just providing feedback on week 3 assignment. Yeah, a lot of content in week 3, all these different theories of deviance, right? Trying to sort out. I think the big picture piece is, okay, here's how I think about deviance from a kind of a sociological perspective. Then ultimately just thinking about deviance in a more just sort of critical way, critically thinking through, what makes something deviant, how do we classify something deviant, and then like thinking about the role of like the 4 areas, right? The actor, the act, the setting, the audience response. Like, what are all these factors that go into what is defining something as deviant and how we respond to it, which can get us into thinking about social control mechanisms, both informal and formal, about responding to it. So there's a lot of stuff that's like really interesting to kind of get into. And there's a class, Soc 211, Sociology of Deviance, which is a really valuable class. I think really interesting class. Encourage you to take it if you're interested sometime down the road. Okay, so for this assignment, so we kind of break it up into the section 1, section 2, or maybe first start off with some general feedback. For the most part, everyone's in the space of focusing on defining and explaining. One things that I'm evaluating or looking for are the terms, theories, and ideas, are they defined and explained in a sufficient manner? So are they accurate and detailed enough? There are a few times where somebody's jumping right into, let's say, medicalization of deviance and talking about examples, illustrations, without providing a definition or an overview or an explanation of what the idea or the theory is. So it's really important to kind of start with that clarity of definition, clarity of explanation before launching into examples and illustrations kind of thing. I should also say, like, you're looking in section 1, coverage of the textbook information. If you cover things that are also within the lecture itself, totally fine, but you need to kind of go into like, okay, what is the textbook content? How is it different from what can you add? What else are you getting from the textbook that's adding to your understanding of that particular concept or theory? So yeah, I mean, definitely go after something that, that you were interested in, maybe the lecture or something like you did the textbook part first. And then later on you saw, oh, that was covered in the lecture as well. Just kind of go back and make sure you just like add more, like what else from the text is adding to your understanding of that area. In section 1, yeah, a lot of interesting things were covered. Some people talked about norms and culture, kind of historical kind of things. Marijuana came up a few times. People talking about just kind of constructions about marijuana and how they changed over time. A few people talked about social control, whether formal social control, like within institutions, or informal, looking from within the community. One student talked about, like in colonial America, like this informal social control coming from the community versus in modern day society, much more formal systems of control. Deviance avowal, which was a pretty powerful concept. Somebody picked up on that, talked about the deviance. Sometimes people, when there's a stigma, like an individual's being stigmatized, sometimes individuals engage in and embrace the deviant label itself. The example I oftentimes use is the word queer, and queer was originally, used in a stigmatizing way back in during the queer movement in the 1960s, 1970s, primarily 1970s. Eventually, individuals being stigmatized with that language of queer, they started to embrace that term and said, you know what, we are queer, and sort of took the power away from those who are labeling them as, in a stigmatizing way. So deviance avowal, interesting concept. A couple of people talked about stereotypes and the challenges of stereotypes specifically applied to criminals. I think a pretty powerful thing. And then the prison industrial complex, the sort of idea that, the United States incarcerates more people than anyone else in the world per capita, but it's not even close between us and the next country. Of all those individuals who are incarcerated around the world, 25% of them are in the United States, 25% are in the United States. So we incarcerate 25% of the world's incarcerated population are here in the United States. I mean, it just begs to ask the question, like, what's going on? What's happening with that? Yeah, some clarification on some of the stuff that was talked about in terms of the second section. Yes, the sociological perspective on deviance is examining the the definition is the study of the violation of norms. So if there's something that's identified as deviant, if there's been a norm violation. But then that gets us into a place of thinking about, well, let's understand where the norm comes from, the context around the norm, how does that norm get established, kind of how does that influence the judgment or response side of things. Clarification a little bit on medicalization of deviance. It's not that our behavior, for things that get medicalized as being deviant, it's not that the actual cause of the behavior lies in the medical side or the biological side. It's that the biology is being defined as the reason for the way of thinking, doing, knowing kind of thing, what's being identified as being deviant. So for example, a gender dysphoria disorder or attention deficit disorder, it's not that it's actually rooted necessarily in biology, but that we're taking an everyday life issue and we're medicalizing it. So that's kind of the clarification there. Conflict theory on deviance, just a little bit of clarification here too. It's on two different levels I think you could look at. One, from a conflict theory perspective, what's causing deviance? Like what are the factors that are shaping the amount of deviance? So oftentimes looking at issues of inequality, access to resources being one of the major kind of instigators or factors that's influencing a crime. And the other part of that is the response from the criminal justice system of those who are being caught, apprehended, labeled, involved in the criminal justice system, that there's an economic, there's a class, there's a racial disparity going on within the criminal justice system. That'd be another area of examination of conflict theory. Looking at social bond theory or Hershey's social control theory, a little bit of clarification there is that Hershey's control theory is focusing on individuals who have a sense of belonging and connection, attachment to conventional society. They have a sense of a commitment to it, a belief in conventional society. They have more stake in conformity, or more likely to not engage in deviant behavior. So therefore, it's not that a person is more moral than another, that they don't commit an act of deviance. Rather, they have more stake in conformity. They have more stake in that. Little clarification on labeling theory. A lot of people talk about labeling theory. Labeling theory, just one clarification. Labeling theory, definitely it can be a master status. I think that's an important part that came up quite a bit. The label doesn't cause behavior. So the label is a potential influence. Individuals who get stigmatized through a particular label, they have to kind of contend with that label. Like, well, how does it impact them? How do they wrestle with it? But it's never that the label is causing anybody to do anything. It's not like it's a direct causal kind of relationship. And looking at social disorganization theory and the issue of, for example, of home ownership, it's just more to connecting the dots there, saying, okay, home ownership, it's not that home ownership itself leads to less crime in a community. It's that home ownership means people have commitment and responsibility to the community in which they live in. They're engaged in it. They are more likely to be involved in the community. The eyes of the community are there. People know their neighbors. Like all kinds of these things that are going on because people own their homes. Differential association, great applications to looking at alcohol and drugs. That there's a motto in alcohol and drugs. I think I brought this up before, that you can't, to move away from using alcohol or drugs, one must change their playmates and playgrounds, kind of 12-step kind of motto. And that speaks to this idea of differential association. We learn deviance like we learn conventional behavior. We learn motives, rationalizations, justifications by being involved with a kind of a group that's reinforcing certain ways of thinking, knowing, and doing. So it's like trying to change behavior, to move away from alcohol and drug use, is interacting with individuals who are more pro-social, who are not engaged in alcohol and drug use. That's facilitating that kind of change. And then finally, Merton's strain theory. Merton had the idea that the degrees of deviance and or crime, certain types of deviance and crime, are higher when there's a disparity between the cultural goal of the American dream and the institutional means. So in some communities where you don't have strong schools, you don't have the economic resources, to be going down to this conventional pathway. There's greater strain in that community. And in that space is when certain types of crime and deviance are more likely to happen. Notice that the focus is not on the individual in any of these cases, but it's all on structure, culture, these different kind of things. Kind of going back to things like the general and the particular, right? Going back to thinking about even our cultural values, that sometimes our cultural values make it difficult for us to look at things more structurally. And here we're looking at, how do we think about that complex interaction between individuals and their environment? And here we're focused on, okay, how do we think about those environmental influences ranging from, the micro level of labeling and sort of, that looking glass self stuff maybe, or the stigma, all the way to institutional structure things, going into conflict theory or functionalism. Anyway, so yeah, have a great day. Have a great weekend. If you have any questions, I'm here for you. So let me know.